I wanted to give a bit of an overview of how we can use cloud-based project management tools to improve stakeholder engagement. This was a part of a larger presentation, and this was focusing purely down on the communication side. So I came across, I was involved in a project a couple of years ago, and it involved probably 400 odd stakeholders across multiple countries, various states, and the challenge then is how you maintain that communication levels and effectively engage with those stakeholders. So I'll touch on a bit of the project background, why I think it's important, some of the guiding principles that we learnt along the way, what worked, what didn't work, and then share some of the tools that we used. So the project was only fairly small in budget, about $2 million. It had there was a commitment there to use project management tools, 400 stakeholders across 3 countries and many states in Australia. So some challenges there in how you communicate effectively. Why I think it's important, I mean, in today's society and globalised projects, we're more and more looking to bridge countries, bridge states, and really companies are generally acting in more countries than one. So the communication now is a lot challenging than it was before. And if we look at take it from PMBOK there, the cost to influence graph, it basically shows that the cost of change increases exponentially as the project lifecycle moves through. And if we look at the average interest levels of stakeholders, engagement levels of stakeholders, everyone's generally fairly interested early on in the project, and then there's a gradual decline in interest levels and engagement levels. And this changes depending on the project and the size. But it starts to increase again towards the end as the project nears its handover point or the transfer of risk, where that project becomes business as usual and into the stakeholders' ownership. And then they start to be a little bit more involved in the project, dig a little bit deeper, ask for changes, request new functionality, and that's one of the inherent problems we have. And if we look at that overlaid with the cost time curve, we can see that right in the part where we don't want change, there's a lot more engagement and involvement, so that brings a lot more change. Some of the challenges that I think we face daily with stakeholders is it's generally quite difficult to do. It's difficult to engage with stakeholders and communicate with them, particularly across multiple countries, multiple states, different time zones. There's constant repetitive requests for information. Project updates, you can be walking through the building and you get asked for an update by 5 different people. So you tend to set up an elevator pitch in your head. Right, if I get held up, I'm just going to say that and keep moving. There's repetitive reporting. You get asked to present a paper or a monthly report, and that's then shown to 3 different committees, control groups, every month. It's just repetitive repetition. And then the impacts that stakeholders can have on the cost and the schedule, as we saw in the engagement graph, it's can be quite detrimental to a project. And then I think there's an increased chance of a perceived failure. So even if the project's delivered on time, on budget, if stakeholders didn't feel effectively engaged and communicated with, they still feel that the project was a failure from their point of view. So you get to this point, and that's really what's going to stay in the mind of the stakeholders after the project ends, is that, well, Chris didn't communicate very well, we won't use that project team again. And so they're really the key points we're trying to overcome by using cloud-based tools to communicate and really engage with our stakeholders. So some of the key points of the solution is, number 1, use cloud-based project management tools to share schedule and share information. There's hundreds and hundreds on the market. And the other side of it then is using social communication tools to engage in increased interaction and trying to facilitate that two-way communication. And I think Ted did a presentation yesterday on particularly aspect of social media tools and some of the successes they've had in construction projects. What I think is an interesting paradigm shift in the way we communicate with social tools is really changing the shift to a more small and targeted chunks of information. So really, rather than putting out a weekly, monthly, 4-page update, you can change your communication style to be almost issues-based and action-based, so live, hourly snippets of relevant information, and moving away from this static monthly reporting cycle. With that comes constant, frequent communication. So again, active live updates that's relevant to the project as it's moving through the life cycle. And even if it's not two-way communication, just that constant push out of information that's relevant, stakeholders generally feel more involved in the project and are more engaged in the process. And the win, obviously the end game is to try and get that push-pull communication style. And that's a challenge. It's getting sort of, the take-ups is coming there. It's getting, that push-pull style is starting to come through, but it is a challenge. Most of the communication style using social tools tends to be one way, even though we all want it to be two-way. But that's okay. So if we shift now to sort of cloud engagement and project management tools and things, the goal is to gain stakeholder support. We want to get stakeholders on side and keep them on side, and increase relevant communication. So the relevant is a really key word there. Obviously, then that comes with a decreased repetitive communication. If we get it right, there should be fewer issues and late changes that are stakeholder-led. So if we increase that stakeholder engagement level early on and maintain that high level, then that should bring fewer changes, and that hopefully will get informed stakeholders. And we do that by sending out only relevant and concise bits of information targeted to each stakeholder. Less time writing reports and updates, and we get interested and engaged stakeholders. So these are the wins that we get by using cloud-based technology. And then there's an increased chance of success, particularly in the reduction of the perceived failure from lack of communication. That's really the goal. Some of the key tools that we've come across, and this is just a selection of but a few. Twitter is a great example of it restricts you to 140 characters. So it really forces you, if you're going to use Twitter as part of your communication channel, is each burst of information can only be 140 characters long. So you really need to consider what's the relevant and concise information that you want to send out at that burst. Some of the more scheduling tools, I'm not sure if this pointer, does this have a pointer? Yes. So at task, Adaptive 5 PM, Huddle, Manymoon, Basecamp, not so much. There are a lot of cloud-based scheduling tools, so you can create your schedule into the cloud. It's accessed through any web browser, and then all the tasks can be completed and updated live. So it's very transparent for every stakeholder to see what's happening, what's being completed. Project blogs is another great one where you can create a central repository for your information. So you basically, like what Les showed with Google Docs, a project blog is your home for all the information. That's where everything gets filtered back into. There you store all your project documents, all your threaded discussions around change, issues, all your management, all your documents stored in the project blog. And that's it's sort of becoming key to this communication style, is really having that one central place that people can go to. They know all the information will be there, and then you send out bursts from other means via Twitter or your schedule and other tools such as that. With all that information, there's then the risk of mass information. And so really, we're getting too much information on a daily basis. I mean, I'll come back to Brisbane and probably have 1,000 emails in my inbox, and everyone's probably got the same experience. It's basically we receive too much information on a daily basis. And with this, particularly with this style, it really needs to be focused on targeted and relevant and specific information to each stakeholder group. That's the key. If you're just sending out bursts of information, you won't get the buy-in. It needs to be easier for stakeholders to review information in this manner than in the traditional static style of communication. And again, we want to try and, as much as we can, facilitate pull and push-based communication styles. Some of the resistance points that we came across when we put this into a project is you still need to do stakeholder planning. You still want to select your stakeholder groups and identify what the sensitivities are and what communication styles that they want to be involved in and how they want and the information they want to see. It can be one way. We thought it'd be this great two-way bit of communication. It didn't work that way. It does take a lot of time and effort to build a two-way communication style, but that didn't reduce the effectiveness of the communication. Even though it was one way, for most part, the engagement levels increased dramatically. For most people, it is outside their standard workflow. So for most of us, email is our go-to communication tool. So it does take a bit of effort to move away from that, and you really need to constantly be pushing back, saying, use a project blog or use the Twitter feed for that. Availability to the internet, that's getting less and less of a problem, but there's not always a case. So if you do have some remote teams, you need to consider that internet availability and reliability. And the demographic of your stakeholders. Some of the older stakeholders didn't want to use the tool. It was another tool they had to use. We had general success in they delegated down through a PA or a champion that could then relay the information back to them. So looking at, if you do have an old demographic that isn't technically savvy, maybe look for a PA or someone else that can be involved in the communication cycle. And there's a cost and time to implement. Most of those tools come at a monthly fee. Some are free. There's going to be resourcing and things required. So just have a consideration on that. Some of the guiding principles to make it successful. This is sort of a reflection on some of the lessons that we learnt along the way. Each burst of information needs to be fairly significant to each stakeholder group. So if it's a sponsor that could be particularly sensitive to certain risks, and so every bit of information that's sent out needs to be relevant, clear and concise to that stakeholder group. Responsiveness is another key point. So if you can make that action orientated, hourly updates, hourly snippets, tasks complete, we've got sign off for this document today, that goes out to the wide stakeholder group, and it's just, that's the whole point, is keep it responsive. Understand the communication expectations of the stakeholders. So that's through your effective stakeholder planning. Create stakeholder groups and send out the information to those groups that's relevant. Where possible, try and facilitate two-way communication. As I said, won't always happen, but it doesn't reduce the effectiveness of the tools. And transparency is another great point. If you can create a transparent information environment, you're really airing all your dirty laundry. If an issue occurs or a risk has occurred, you put that out there, and you really do make your communications transparent and open. And then, particularly if you're crossing borders, the cultural differences that you need to consider in your communication. Could be certain words you don't use or certain phrases, but just have an understanding of that when you're going out through the internet, you can reach a mass audience. So have an understanding of those cultural differences. And you want to always maintain the context, whether it be strategic or tactical on your stakeholder groups. So try and send out two versions of the information, one aimed at the strategic sponsors and others at the tactical project management, project team stakeholder groups. And I think communication is probably the core of stakeholder engagement across the board. If we can increase the communication, transparent, responsive, that should follow with increased engagement of all our stakeholders. That's pretty much it. I'd love to hear, connect with me on all those different channels, share some of your experiences in using social tools, and particularly in projects, and let me know what worked and what didn't work, and I'd love to hear your feedback through any of those channels.